You've been lied to. Not once. Every single day. For over a century. Right now, somewhere in the world, there are warehouses filled with millions of diamonds, sitting in the dark, never reaching the market. Because the moment they do, everything you believe collapses. One company decided what love looks like. One campaign rewired an entire civilization. 4 words, planted so deep inside the culture that people stopped questioning them before you were even born. The 2-month rule? Invented. In a meeting room. No science, no logic, no precedent. Just a number that became a moral standard. And you felt guilty for questioning it. They went to Hollywood before they ran a single ad. They dressed the idea in romance, made you watch it, absorb it, feel it as your own. And when someone created an identical diamond in a laboratory, cheaper, perfect, real, the industry didn't compete. They didn't lower prices. They changed the story. Again, this video isn't about diamonds. It's about the moment you stopped thinking for yourself. That moment exists for every person watching this. And by the end, you'll know exactly when it happened to you. I need you to forget everything you think you know about diamonds. Not because it's wrong, because it was designed to feel right. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent 11 years inside the system, trading, analyzing, moving stones from one side of the world to the other. And at some point, I started asking the wrong questions. The kind of questions you're not supposed to ask. Let's start with a fact that nobody talks about at the jewelry counter. Carbon. Diamonds are made of carbon, the same element that makes up coal. Pencil graphite. The exhaust from your car. Carbon is not rare. Carbon is everywhere. So here's the first question, and I want you to hold it. If diamonds are made of one of the most common elements on Earth, why do they cost more than most people earn in a year? Imagine the Kimberley region, 1867. A 15-year-old boy finds a small, transparent stone near the Orange River. He doesn't know what it is. A neighbor offers to buy it, pays almost nothing. That stone is later confirmed to be a diamond. Within months, thousands of people are flooding into South Africa. Within years, industrial mining has begun. The supply of diamonds on the global market explodes. And here's what every economist will tell you should happen next. When supply increases dramatically, price falls. That is the law. That is how markets work. Except, it didn't happen. The price didn't fall. Not slightly, not gradually. It held. And nobody, in the press, in government, in academia, asked the obvious question. Why? At the time, it seemed like a coincidence. Later, I would understand it was the first sign of something much larger. There's a word that kept appearing in the documents I worked with. Stockpile. I didn't pay attention to it at first. It sounded like standard inventory management. It wasn't. Remember that word. Because in a few minutes, it's going to mean something completely different. By the 1880s, dozens of mining operations were running simultaneously. The ground was producing more diamonds than the market had ever seen. Investors were nervous. Some began selling their claims. Others tried to compete, cutting prices, flooding channels, undercutting each other. The classic pattern of an uncontrolled market. And then, one man decided the market should not be uncontrolled. His name was Cecil Rhodes. He wasn't a scientist, not a geologist. He was a businessman who understood one thing with absolute clarity. Abundance is the enemy of value. So he didn't try to sell more diamonds. He did something no one had done at that scale before. He started buying everything, not to sell it, to hold it. Competitors, claims, entire mining operations, one by one. By 1888, a single company controlled the majority of diamond production in South Africa. That company was called De Beers. The price held because the supply was never allowed to reach the market. Not naturally, not by coincidence, by design. But here's what I didn't understand, not until years later. Controlling the stones was only half the plan. The other half was something far more disturbing, and it had nothing to do with mining. Cecil Rhodes once said, "I would annex the planets if I could." He wasn't joking. And with diamonds, he came closer than anyone should have been allowed to. Picture a map of South Africa in 1880. Dozens of small mining claims, independent operators, competing companies, a chaotic open market, exactly what economics textbooks describe as healthy. Now picture the same map 10 years later. Almost everything on it belongs to one entity, one company, one man. Rhodes didn't conquer the diamond market the way armies conquer territory. He did it quietly, with contracts, with pressure, with money. And when money wasn't enough, with something harder to define. Here's what the history books usually skip. Rhodes didn't just buy competitors, he made them an offer they couldn't structurally refuse. If you sold to De Beers, you got a fair price and stayed in business as a supplier. If you didn't, De Beers would flood your specific market segment with cheap stones from their other mines. Temporarily, just long enough to destroy your margins. Then they'd return with a lower offer. Most people took the first offer. By 1889, De Beers controlled approximately 90% of the world's diamond production. Not through innovation, not through better diamonds, through the systematic elimination of alternatives. Now, remember that word from part 1, stockpile. Here's what it actually meant inside the system. De Beers wasn't just mining diamonds and selling them, they were mining diamonds and holding them. Warehouses in London, vaults in Kimberley, stones that had already been extracted, sitting. Not because there was no demand, because releasing them would lower the price. Think about what that means for a moment. The rarity of diamonds was never geological. It was logistical. Someone decided how many diamonds the world was allowed to see, and that number was always less than what existed. To understand how deep this went, you need to understand one system: the sightholders. De Beers didn't sell diamonds on an open market. They selected a small group of approved buyers called sightholders. 10 times a year, those buyers would travel to London. They would be handed a box, a literal cardboard box filled with rough diamonds. They could not inspect the stones beforehand. They could not negotiate the contents. They could not refuse. The price was set by De Beers. The selection was made by De Beers. And if a sightholder complained or tried to buy stones elsewhere, they lost their access. Permanently. No appeal. No explanation required. I once sat in a room with a former sightholder. He'd been in the system for 19 years. I asked him what happened to buyers who pushed back. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "They stopped being buyers." That was it. No elaboration. He didn't need to say more. There's something else from that era that most people never connect. De Beers wasn't just controlling supply. They were studying demand, quietly, methodically, commissioning research, tracking purchasing patterns, mapping emotional triggers. At the time, it looked like standard market research. It wasn't. They were building something, a blueprint, for a problem they could see coming, even before most people knew the problem existed. By the 1930s, the system was under pressure. The Great Depression had hit. luxury purchases collapsed worldwide. And here, for the first time, De Beers faced something their monopoly couldn't fix. They controlled the supply perfectly, but they couldn't control something more fundamental. They couldn't control what people wanted. Because here's the thing almost no one says out loud. Before 1938, diamonds were not a symbol of love. They were not expected at engagements. They were not a cultural requirement. They were stones. Expensive stones, but stones. The demand that De Beers had built their entire empire on was starting to look fragile. So they made a decision. Not to mine more. Not to lower prices. Not to find new markets in the traditional sense. They hired an advertising agency and gave them a brief that, when I finally read the original document, made me put it down and sit quietly for several minutes. The brief didn't say, "Sell diamonds." It said something far more precise, far more dangerous. They didn't want to create desire. They wanted to create absence. The feeling that without a diamond, something was missing from your life, from your relationship, from your identity. 4 words were about to be written. And once they entered the culture, they never left. What if I told you the most successful marketing campaign in history wasn't designed to make you want something? It was designed to make you feel broken without it. There's a difference, and that difference is everything. New York, 1938. A meeting room somewhere in Midtown Manhattan. 2 groups of people sit across from each other. One side, De Beers executives, nervous, quietly desperate. The other side, N.W. Ayer and Son, one of the oldest advertising agencies in America. The brief on the table was unusual, not, "Help us sell more diamonds." The actual brief, and I've read accounts of this document, was closer to, "Create a situation where every woman expects a diamond, and every man feels obligated to provide one." Not desire. Obligation. That's where this starts. Here's something almost nobody knows. Before this campaign, the engagement ring tradition existed, but diamonds were not the standard. Sapphires, rubies, pearls, even simple gold bands, all were considered completely acceptable. In many parts of Europe, a ring with no stone at all was normal. Diamonds were for royalty, for the extraordinarily wealthy. For everyone else, they simply weren't part of the conversation. De Beers needed to change that. Not for one country, for the entire Western world, simultaneously. So how do you rewrite a cultural norm? How do you take something that didn't exist and make it feel ancient, natural, inevitable? The answer they found was so simple, it should terrify you. N.W. Ayer didn't start with advertisements. They started with movies. They approached Hollywood studios directly. The ask was subtle. Could leading men, in romantic scenes, present diamond rings to leading women? Not as product placement in the modern sense. No logos, no brand mentions, just the gesture, the moment. The diamond, visible, central, inevitable. And Hollywood agreed, because it cost them nothing. And within years, millions of people had watched their favorite actors perform the ritual, without ever being sold to, without ever seeing an advertisement. They just absorbed it, as if it had always been this way. At the time, film critics called these scenes romantic. Nobody called them what they actually were, a rehearsal for a behavior that didn't yet exist in real life. Parallel to Hollywood, they went to women's magazines, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Ladies' Home Journal. But again, not with advertisements, with editorial content, stories, columns, fashion spreads, featuring diamonds, written to look like journalism, designed to feel like culture. The readers had no way to know the difference, because there was no label, no disclosure. This was 1939. The rules didn't exist yet. And then came the move I still think about. Beers and N.W. Ayer began sending diamond jewelry to celebrities, socialites, and public figures. For free, not asking for endorsement, just asking them to wear it. In public, at events, where photographers would be present. Within months, diamonds appeared in newspapers, on the wrists and necks of women that ordinary people admired, aspired to become. The message was never spoken. It didn't need to be. This is what success looks like. This is what love looks like. This is what you should want. In 1947, the campaign produced its 4 words. A diamond is forever. Advertising Age would later name it the most recognized slogan of the 20th century. But here's what those 4 words actually meant. Strategically, deliberately. Forever meant, don't resell it. Because here's the fact, the industry never advertised. Diamonds lose between 50 and 80% of their retail value the moment you try to sell them back. The secondary market for diamonds is weak. Almost deliberately weak. If people resold diamonds freely, the illusion of rarity would collapse overnight. So, forever wasn't a romantic promise. It was a mechanism, a way to keep stones out of the secondary market, to protect the price, to protect the system. The most romantic slogan ever written was an economic instrument, disguised as a feeling. I want you to pause here, just for a second. Think about the last time you saw a diamond ring. In a movie, in an advertisement, in real life. Think about what you felt. Now ask yourself one question. Where did that feeling come from? Was it yours? Or was it placed there? Carefully? Deliberately? Decades before you were born? Write your answer in the comments. Not your opinion about diamonds. Your answer to that specific question. Where did the feeling come from? Because in part 4, I'm going to show you exactly how deep this goes. And I promise you, it goes deeper than you think. At some point in the 20th century, a man started feeling guilty for not spending enough. Not because he was irresponsible, not because he was selfish, because someone, somewhere, decided what enough meant and wrote it into culture so carefully that it felt like common sense. I want you to picture a specific moment. Late 1940s. America is recovering from the war. Men are returning home, starting families, proposing marriage. And for the first time in history, a significant portion of them are walking into jewelry stores, specifically looking for a diamond. Not because their fathers did it. Most of their fathers didn't. Not because it was tradition. It wasn't. Not yet. Because somewhere, they had absorbed the idea that this was what you do. This is what love requires. The campaign had been running for less than a decade, and it was already working. But N.W. Ayer wasn't finished. Demand was growing. But the question of how much to spend was still undefined. People were buying diamonds, but they were buying small ones, modest ones, affordable ones. That wasn't enough. So sometime in the 1980s, a new message entered the conversation. Quietly, without announcement. Isn't 2 months' salary a small price to pay for something that lasts forever? That was the line. 2 months? Not 1, not 3. 2, specific enough to feel researched. Vague enough to apply to everyone. That rule had no scientific basis, no economic logic, no cultural precedent. It was invented, in a meeting room, by people who needed to increase the average transaction value, and within years, jewelers were quoting it as fact. Financial advisors were referencing it. Couples were arguing about it. An invented number had become a moral standard. Here's the detail that still disturbs me most. In 1967, Japan was approached. At that point, fewer than 5% of Japanese women received a diamond engagement ring. The tradition simply didn't exist there. It wasn't part of Japanese culture. It wasn't part of Japanese history. De Beers and their partners ran a targeted campaign, magazines, films, carefully placed editorial content, the same playbook, different country. By 1981, 60% of Japanese brides received a diamond ring. In less than 15 years, a tradition that didn't exist had been installed into an entirely different culture, from the outside, without most people ever knowing it happened. Think about what that means. If it worked in Japan, where there was zero cultural foundation, what does that tell you about where the tradition came from everywhere else? I remember the moment this stopped being abstract for me. I was 26, working as a junior analyst inside a diamond trading firm, connected directly to the De Beers supply chain. My girlfriend at the time, now my ex-wife, had started leaving magazine pages open, pages with rings on them. I remember looking at the prices, feeling the pressure. Not from her, exactly. From something less visible. From the air around the situation. I spent 3 months' salary, because 2 felt insufficient. I didn't question it. I didn't ask where that feeling came from. I just felt it, and acted on it. It took me 4 more years inside the system to understand what had actually happened in that moment. 6 years later, the marriage ended. I tried to sell the ring, a diamond I had paid significant money for, a stone I had been told would hold its value forever, after all. The jeweler offered me less than 30% of what I paid. I asked why. He shrugged. That's just how it works. I knew enough by then to understand what he meant. The diamond hadn't lost value because of condition. It lost value because the retail price was never real. It was a number constructed to feel permanent. The actual market, the one without the marketing, told a completely different story. And here is the part that took me longest to accept. The people who built this system knew exactly what the resale market looked like. They knew diamonds didn't hold value in the way they implied. They knew forever was a message about behavior, not about gemology. They built the campaign anyway, because it worked, because it still works, because right now, somewhere in the world, a man is standing in a jewelry store, feeling guilty about the size of a stone, spending money he may not have, on a gem whose price was decided not by nature, not by rarity, but by a system designed specifically to make him feel exactly what he's feeling. But here's where the story breaks open completely. Because in the last 20 years, something appeared that the entire system was never built to answer. A diamond, chemically perfect, physically identical, grown in a laboratory, in weeks. And the industry's response to it tells you everything you need to know about what they were actually selling all along. Everything I've told you, the monopoly, the marketing, the manufactured rarity, you might be thinking, that was then. Things are different now. They're not. And I'm going to prove it in the next 4 minutes. Before I continue, I need you to make a decision. Right now, you've heard everything. The stockpiles, the Hollywood strategy, the invented rules. So answer this in the comments. One word. If you think the diamond industry is still manipulating perception today, write system. If you think the manipulation ended when the monopoly broke, write free. One word. Because by the end of this, you might want to change your answer. In the 1950s, General Electric grew the first synthetic diamond in a laboratory. Chemically identical to a natural stone, same carbon structure, same hardness, same optical properties, indistinguishable, even to trained gemologists without specialized equipment. De Beers knew immediately, and their internal response, according to accounts from people who were in those rooms, was not scientific curiosity. It was controlled panic. For decades, they suppressed the technology, not through legislation, through narrative. Laboratory diamonds were repositioned as fake, synthetic, not real. The language was deliberate, because the stone itself gave them nothing to attack, so they attacked the origin. They needed you to believe that where a diamond came from mattered more than what it actually was. Here's what laboratory diamonds did to the market. A 1-carat natural diamond, retail, costs between $5,000 and $8,000. A laboratory diamond of identical quality costs between $300 and $800 today. Same carbon, same structure, same appearance. 10 times cheaper. When this became widely available, the natural diamond market faced its first genuinely uncontrollable threat. Not a competitor, not another country's mines, the truth. And here is where the industry revealed, more clearly than anything else, what they had always been selling. Their response wasn't to lower prices. It wasn't to compete on quality. It was to double down on story. A laboratory diamond has no history. It carries no journey. It isn't rare. The same playbook. A new target. In 2018, De Beers made an announcement that stopped me completely. After decades of calling laboratory diamonds fake, after building an entire cultural architecture around natural rarity, they launched their own laboratory diamond brand, called Lightbox, selling laboratory diamonds at low prices, deliberately low, to position lab diamonds as fashion jewelry, not engagement jewelry, to protect the emotional category of natural diamonds by making lab diamonds feel disposable. Think about the precision of that move. They entered the market they had spent decades destroying, specifically to control how it was perceived. Not to compete, to contain. The monopoly had changed shape, but the instinct, the need to control what people believed, had never left. I left the industry in 2019. Not dramatically, not with a statement. I just stopped. Because I had spent 11 years helping move stones, from mines to vaults, to markets, to fingers. And I had watched, up close, how the value was constructed. Not discovered. Constructed. And I kept thinking about that jewelry store, that moment at 26, the open magazine pages, the guilt about the size of the stone. I didn't feel manipulated at the time. That's the point. You never do. The monopoly is weaker now. New mining countries, antitrust pressure, laboratory alternatives. But the culture, the idea that a diamond equals love, that a specific stone, at a specific price, proves a specific feeling, that survived everything. It survived the collapse of the monopoly. It survived the laboratory diamond. It survived every expose, every documentary, every investigation. Because it wasn't stored in a vault in London. It was stored in something much harder to reach. I want you to think of one specific moment, a proposal you witnessed, a ring you bought, a store you walked into, a feeling you had, standing there, about what was expected. And I want you to ask yourself one question, not about diamonds, about yourself. When exactly did you stop thinking for yourself? Not in that moment necessarily, But somewhere before it, someone built a room in your mind, furnished it carefully, and by the time you walked in, it felt like home. Go back to the comments. Did you write system or free? You can change your answer now if you want. They didn't sell you a diamond. They sold you the moment you stopped asking whose idea this was.